In the quiet hills of Hudson Valley, 9-year-old Madison Carter knows more about engines than most grown men. One afternoon, she spots a broken-down Mustang and a man in a tailored suit, David Bennett, a billionaire with a past he keeps buried. He dismisses her, until she fixes his car using nothing but a wrench, a wire, and sheer confidence. But then he sees it. The ring. The same ruby ring he gave a lost little girl 15 years ago. As David digs into Madison's past, secrets unravel. About a mother who fled, an orphanage that vanished, and a twin sister he never knew existed. Madison isn't just a stranger. She's family. And their story? It's only beginning. Subscribe for more emotionally gripping, twist-filled stories you'll never forget. The engine hissed as the sleek black Mustang rolled to a stop on the side of Route 9D just outside Beacon, New York. David Bennett tapped the steering wheel with growing irritation, steam curling from beneath the hood like a mocking whisper. Dressed in a charcoal gray suit, his silver tie loosened at the collar, David looked every bit the billionaire real estate mogul, except now he was stranded on a cracked 2-lane road with no signal and nothing but trees and silence stretching in both directions. He popped the hood and stepped out, cursing under his breath. The sun filtered through bare tree branches, casting long shadows across the damp asphalt. He stared down at the engine, a mess of tubes and metal and heat. "I think your water pump's shot," a small voice said behind him. David spun, startled. Standing a few feet away was a girl, 9 or 10 maybe. Her jeans were torn at the knees, her hoodie zipped up to her chin. She had a greasy wrench in her hand and a small toolbox slung over her shoulder. David narrowed his eyes. "Where did you come from?" She shrugged. "Walked? I live just up the road." She stepped closer, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "Name's Madison. You overheated." He looked at her, incredulous. "How do you know that?" Madison didn't answer. Instead, she set down her toolbox, unzipped it, and pulled out a battered flashlight. "Pop the cap off your radiator, slowly. I'll show you." David hesitated, then obeyed. Steam hissed out as she peered inside. "Yup," she said. "Coolant's low. My uncle taught me how to patch this up till you can get a proper fix." He studied her. Dirty sneakers, grease under her fingernails, a calm confidence in her voice. She didn't flinch under his gaze. She just went to work, asking for his spare bottle of water and some duct tape. 10 minutes later, the engine had stopped steaming. "Try it now," she said, stepping back. David turned the key. The Mustang grumbled, then purred. He looked up, astonished. "How did you—" She wiped her hands on her jeans. "Temporary fix. You'll still need a mechanic, but it'll get you where you're going." David stepped out and walked toward her. "You some kind of roadside angel?" Madison grinned. "Nope, just hungry." He chuckled despite himself and pulled out his wallet. He was about to hand her a 20 when he saw it, a ruby ring on her left hand. Small, delicate, with an inscription along the edge. His smile faded. Where'd you get that ring?" he asked slowly. Madison looked down at it. "Was my mom's. She gave it to me before she died." David's throat tightened. That ring, he knew it. He had it made when he was barely 20. He gave it to a girl he'd lost track of. A girl who'd once said she'd name her daughter Madison. His mind reeled. "What was her name? Your mother's?" "Laura," Madison said softly. "Laura Carter." He took a step back. The air around him seemed to vanish. "I have to go," she said quickly, slinging her toolbox over her shoulder. "My uncle doesn't like it when I'm out after dark." David nodded, dazed. She turned and walked up the road, the sound of gravel crunching beneath her feet. He stared at her until she disappeared into the woods. Then he looked down at the steaming car, still humming. And suddenly, nothing in his life made sense anymore. David sat motionless in his Mustang for several minutes, engine idling low, like the thoughts swirling through his mind. He couldn't stop picturing the ring on that little girl's finger, the cut of the ruby, the vintage setting, the inscription he'd had etched into the inside band himself, 2LC, where the heart stays. His heart hadn't thought of Laura Carter in over a decade. Now, it wouldn't think of anything else. He shifted into gear and turned down the road Madison had disappeared onto. The sun had dipped lower, casting the woods in a golden haze, branches trembling with late autumn wind. His tires crunched slowly over gravel until he spotted a narrow drive and a weathered mailbox that read Carter in chipped white paint. He hesitated, then pulled in. The house was modest. 1 story, porch sagging slightly in the middle, but the yard was neat, the kind that spoke of pride even when money was tight. A rusted red pickup sat under a carport. Tools hung in perfect rows on the side wall. David killed the engine and stepped out. Before he reached the porch, the front door opened. A man in his late 40s stepped out, wiping his hands on a rag. He had the same sharp eyes as Madison, though his wore a cautious edge. "You lost?" he asked, his tone more firm than friendly. "I don't think so," David said, offering a measured nod. "I met a girl earlier, Madison. She helped me with my car." The man's eyes narrowed. "That sounds like her. What's this about?" David hesitated. "I saw the ring on her finger. I recognized it." The man went very still. "That belonged to my sister, Laura." David felt the name hit harder than expected. "I knew her," he said quietly. "Years ago, before she left New York." The screen door creaked open again and Madison peeked out. "Uncle Tom, it's okay. He's the guy with the Mustang." Tom looked over his shoulder, then stepped outside and let the door swing shut. "You better come in," he said. Inside, the house smelled like old books and engine oil. Framed photos lined the walls, faded snapshots of Laura as a young woman, Madison as a toddler, and one picture David hadn't seen in years. Himself and Laura, at the edge of the Hudson, laughing. He remembered that day. He remembered her laugh. Tom caught him staring. "She kept that one," he said gruffly, "even after everything." David's voice was rough. "What happened to her?" Tom poured black coffee into mismatched mugs. "She got sick last year, fast. Doctors said it was aggressive. Madison was 8 when it started. She passed before her 9th birthday." He paused. "Didn't leave much. Just that ring, a few notebooks, and Madison." David swallowed. "She never told me she had a child." Tom's gaze was hard. "She tried. Said she wrote letters, called your office, said your assistant always told her you were too busy." The words landed like a punch. "Claudia," David murmured. "She was with me then." "She was rude," Tom said flatly. "Hung up on Laura more than once." David closed his eyes. He remembered Claudia, overly protective, always shielding him from what she called emotional clutter. "She thought she was helping," he said, though the words rang hollow. "Helping who?" Tom said. The silence stretched. Madison sat on the floor by the couch, sketching in a worn notebook. David watched her, then asked softly, "Has she ever said anything about her father?" Tom hesitated. "Just that Laura told her he was important, that if anything happened she should remember his name." David turned toward her. "Madison, do you know who your father is?" She didn't look up. "Mom said his name was David Bennett." She added a final pencil stroke. "Like you." David's breath caught. She still hadn't looked up, as if saying it aloud made it too real. He crouched beside her, voice trembling. "Do you believe her?" Madison shrugged. "I don't know, but you came back. That's something." The simplicity of her words tore through him. Tom cleared his throat. "I don't have answers, David, but I got her, and I made a promise to my sister." David nodded slowly. "So did I. A long time ago. Maybe it's time I keep it." He reached out, tentatively. Madison glanced up, then placed her small hand in his. It fit too perfectly, felt too familiar. For the first time in years, David felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. The late autumn light faded into a soft dusk as David sat stiffly on the old couch, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of cooling coffee. Madison had disappeared into the back bedroom, while Tom leaned against the kitchen doorway, arms folded, watching the man who might be his niece's father wrestle with memories and regret. David broke the silence first, his voice low and uneven. "She was wearing the ring, the same one I gave Laura when we were both just figuring things out. It wasn't worth much, not even real gold, but it meant everything to her." Tom nodded once. "She never took it off, not even at the end." There was a reverence in his tone, the kind that only comes from surviving grief without bitterness. David looked up at him. "Why didn't she come to me in person?" Tom's jaw tightened. "She wanted to, but you'd already built your empire by then. She figured you'd moved on, and she was proud, David. Too proud to beg for a place in a life you'd already filled." David set his mug down gently. "She didn't need to beg. But someone made her feel like she would have to," Tom said pointedly. "Your assistant, maybe, or your silence." Before David could reply, Madison returned with a worn leather journal in her arms. She clutched it close like it was treasure. "This is Mom's," she said softly, holding it out to him. "Uncle Tom says I can show you." David took the diary gingerly, as if it might crumble in his hands. The first few pages were covered in Laura's delicate, looping handwriting. Her words were raw, honest, often aching, but full of strength. April 15th. I saw David's face on the cover of Forbes. My heart clenched and lifted at the same time. He looks older, sharper, but the smile's the same. I wonder if he ever thinks of me. June 7th. I mailed another letter. That makes 5. Still no answer. I called the office once. His assistant was cold, told me David doesn't take personal messages. I asked if she could tell him I'm pregnant. She laughed. David swallowed hard, flipping through page after page until he reached the final entry, dated just before Madison's 3rd birthday. Madison asked why she doesn't have a daddy. I told her it's not that simple. One day, she'll understand that sometimes love gets buried under ambition, and sometimes ambition forgets how to love. But I'll never regret her. Not one heartbeat. A key fell from between the pages. Small, silver, taped to the back cover with a piece of yellowing Scotch tape. "What's this?" David asked. Madison shrugged. "I don't know. I never touched it. Uncle Tom said it might go to a safe deposit box." Tom stepped forward. "There's a key bank in Beacon. That's where Laura banked. I always figured she left it for Madison to decide when she was ready." David nodded slowly. "Then I think we should go. All of us." Madison looked up at him, studying his face again, not as a stranger, but with the slow, dawning recognition of someone starting to believe. "Are you scared?" she asked. The question startled him. Of what? Of what you might find. He didn't lie. Yes. She nodded thoughtfully. "Me too. But Mom said brave people are usually scared. They just move anyway." David looked at her, stunned by the quiet wisdom in her small voice. "Your mom was right." Tom clapped his hand on David's shoulder. Not quite affection, but not hostility either. "Then let's move." As they stepped outside, the sky was painted with streaks of violet and burnt orange. The Mustang sat quiet and repaired under the oaks, Madison's fingerprints still smudged across the hood. David opened the passenger door for her. "I've never ridden in a Mustang before," she said. "You fixed it," he replied, almost smiling. "Seems fair you get the first real ride." Tom followed behind in the truck, headlights blinking on as they pulled out onto the road. Inside the Mustang, Madison rolled down the window and let the wind play with her hair. She turned to him. "Do you think the key opens something important?" David's eyes stayed on the road. "I think it opens the truth." And this time, he was ready to face it. The Key Bank branch in Beacon sat nestled between a deli and a dry cleaner, modest and unassuming, the kind of place you'd pass 100 times without noticing. But today, it felt like a portal, a door between silence and answers. David stood beside Madison and Tom as the vault manager reviewed the paperwork, his fingers tapping impatiently against his thigh. Madison's small hand gripped the key in her pocket like it was her mother's voice whispering courage from somewhere unseen. "You're sure the name on file was Laura Carter?" the manager asked, eyeing the safe deposit ledger. Tom nodded. "Yes, she opened it about 10 years ago, just after moving upstate." The man returned with a flat steel box, eyes flicking with curiosity. "There's only one signature required to access this. It's been untouched for 9 years. Madison looked up at David. "Should I open it?" He crouched down, meeting her gaze. "It's yours, sweetheart. I'm just here to help you understand whatever we find." Inside the private viewing room, the three of them stared at the box like it might explode. Madison took a breath, slid the key into the lock, and turned. A soft click echoed in the room. She lifted the lid. Neatly stacked inside were official-looking documents, an envelope labeled, "For Madison, when she's ready," a folded birth certificate, aged adoption papers, and a photograph that instantly stole David's breath. It was of Laura, holding a newborn. The baby's tiny wrist bore a hospital tag, Lily Bennett. David's throat tightened. Lily. Tom reached over and unfolded the adoption form. This was issued through the Hope Haven home. Laura signed these papers under the name Laura Collins. She changed her identity. Madison opened the envelope carefully, removing a letter written in her mother's steady script. "If you're reading this, sweetheart, it means you've found the truth. I never wanted to hide from you, only protect you from. Your real name is Lily Bennett. You were born at Mercy General Hospital in White Plains. What happened after that wasn't right. I left everything behind because someone powerful tried to erase your name, your history. But you were never a mistake. You were always mine. And maybe, just maybe, one day you'll find the other people who should have protected you too." David leaned against the wall, dazed. The pieces clicked together. "My mother told me that my sister died at birth, that it was a stillbirth. But I was 10. I wasn't allowed in the hospital. I just believed them." He rubbed a hand across his jaw, eyes red. "But they lied. My father lied." Tom's voice was quiet, but firm. "If what we're seeing is true, then someone erased Lily's identity, and Laura ran, not to hide but to keep her daughter alive." Madison folded the letter back into the envelope, handling it as if it might break. "I'm Lily?" she asked softly, like she was still trying on the name. David knelt beside her. "Yes, and I think that makes you my sister." The words felt impossible and sacred all at once. Madison blinked up at him. "So, does that mean you're not my dad?" He shook his head gently. "No, but that doesn't mean I'm going anywhere." Tom nodded in approval from the doorway, his arms crossed. Family isn't always about how it starts. Sometimes it's about who chooses to stay. They drove home in silence, the documents in a sealed folder on Madison's lap. Outside the window, Beacon's riverfront blurred in the golden afternoon light, the world somehow softer and heavier all at once. Later that night, in Tom's apartment, David stood on the balcony looking out over the darkened town. Madison came up beside him, still holding the envelope. "Do you think she knew how much I'd need this?" she asked. voice barely above a whisper. "I think she knew you'd need the truth," he answered, his tone full of reverence. "And I think she believed you'd be brave enough to carry it." Madison leaned against the rail, quiet for a long time. "Do you think I have more family?" David turned toward her, heart heavy with unspoken suspicions. "Maybe. And if you do, we'll find them. Together." Madison nodded slowly. Then, for the first time all day, she smiled. "I'm Lily Bennett," she said aloud, testing the words. "I didn't know that yesterday, but I do now." And with that simple truth spoken into the cold autumn air, the first door to the past had finally opened. The next morning, David couldn't stop staring at the photograph Madison, now Lily, had left on the kitchen table. It was slightly faded, tucked under the edge of the sealed folder from the bank. Laura was younger in the photo, maybe mid-20s, holding an infant with gentle reverence. Her smile was soft, exhausted, but full of defiant love. A nurse's badge clipped to her shirt read, "Collins, L." David traced the shape of the infant's hand in the image. A tiny fist curled against her mother's shoulder, and there, barely visible, was a glint on Laura's right ring finger. The ruby ring, the same ring now worn by the 9-year-old girl asleep in the guest room. He walked to the living room where Tom was reading through a worn, leather-bound journal, Laura's diary. "She was tracking everything," Tom muttered, flipping through a page marked with notes. Dates, doctor visits, code names. She was smart. She knew someone was watching. David sat across from him. "Did you read the part where she mentions Hope Haven?" Tom nodded grimly. "She said it was the only place she trusted, until the day it shut down overnight. No explanation. She thought something was happening to the kids. Something wrong." David's throat tightened. "My father shut it down." Tom looked up, his face hard. "You're sure?" "I checked the Bennett Foundation's archives last night. There's a line item from 2008. Facility divestiture. Hope Haven Home. Approved by Charles Bennett. Reason: internal risk exposure." Tom blew out a slow breath. Risk exposure? Sounds like corporate speak for someone was about to talk. David stood, agitated, pacing to the window. "He told me my sister died at birth. There was a funeral, but I never saw the body. I just accepted what I was told." Tom watched him closely. "Do you think he lied on purpose?" David hesitated. "I think he decided it was more convenient if Lily didn't exist." A long silence fell. Then Madison, Lily, shuffled into the room in oversized socks and a hoodie that hung off one shoulder. "I heard you talking," she mumbled. "Were you talking about her again?" David knelt beside her. "Yeah. We're trying to understand everything." She rubbed her eyes. "I had a dream about her. She was singing. She always sang when I was scared." Tom's voice softened. "What did she sing?" "Something from when I was little. A lullaby with a violin in it. She said it was from someone named Bennett." David's breath caught. "My mom played violin. I remember hearing her play when I was little. She stopped after the accident." Lily reached into the pocket of her hoodie and pulled out the ring. She'd taken it off during the night and now held it out carefully. "It's got something inside. I felt it." David gently took the ring and held it up to the morning light. Sure enough, embedded in the underside of the gem was a thin seam, like a lid. He looked at Tom. "Do you have a magnifier?" Minutes later, they were at the kitchen counter. With precision and care, Tom popped open the back of the ring. Inside, wrapped tightly into the hollow cavity, was a microfilm no wider than a matchstick. David stared. "It's a data strip." Tom's voice dropped. "That's old-school corporate espionage tech. You don't use that unless you want to keep something, really, hidden." David placed it in a small container. "I have a guy who can extract whatever's on it." Lily leaned on the counter, eyes wide. "Do you think it's about her? About my mom?" David met her gaze, voice firm but gentle. "I think it might be about all of you, and about the people who tried to make you disappear." Tom nodded slowly. "I'll reach out to my brother. He was a reporter before the accident. If anyone can help us track down what this means, it's someone who remembers what he was working on." Lily looked between them. "What if we're not just finding the truth for me? What if it helps other kids too?" David smiled, something proud flickering in his eyes. "Then your mom raised a hero." That night, Lily took the ring back. Not to wear it, but to place it in a small wooden box with her mother's photo, the birth certificate, and a piece of purple ribbon from one of her old hair ties. "She always said the truth matters," Lily whispered to herself, "even if it hurts, even if it's scary." David stood in the hallway, listening with quiet reverence. He didn't step in, didn't interrupt. He only whispered, "She was right." The small envelope David carried into his office the next morning felt heavier than it looked. Inside, the extracted contents of the microfilm had been printed and sealed by a cybersecurity expert he trusted, one of the few people in the city who owed him more than a favor. David shut the door behind him and lowered the blinds. Then he opened the envelope. The pages were dense, cluttered with research logs, timestamps, initials, but the title alone chilled him to the bone. Project Genesis, Neonatal Genetic Split Trial, Hope Haven Division. He read in stunned silence. The report outlined a highly classified experiment initiated nearly 2 decades ago by a private health tech subsidiary quietly funded through shell companies ultimately tied back to Bennett Holdings. The stated goal? To examine how environmental and social factors shaped the development of genetically identical twins placed in divergent conditions. His stomach turned. It listed 7 pairs of twins. Only 3 had survived. The others? Lost to complications, or never found after being placed into illegal private adoptions. And at the bottom of the second page, in his father's unmistakable signature, was a directive. Terminate the facility. Secure remaining assets. Discredit whistleblowers. David's hands trembled. There it was, proof of everything Laura had feared, everything she'd tried to protect Lily from. His father had authorized the shutdown of Hope Haven not just to cut losses, but to bury a grotesque secret. He flipped another page and stopped. Subject code. LB plus EB, female. Separated, March 7, 2014. Lily Bennett, Elizabeth Bennett, twins. His chest constricted. Lily, Madison, and Rachel. It couldn't be. He reached for his phone, calling Margaret. His mother answered with a voice weary from years of silence. "David?" she said cautiously. "I need you to tell me the truth," he said, voice tight. "Did I have a sister?" There was a pause, a long one, then a sigh. "You had 2. David sat down slowly. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" "Because I was scared of what your father might do. He made it clear that he alone would decide which child would carry the family legacy. The other—" She hesitated, then whispered. "He said she'd only be a distraction." David clenched his jaw. Lily was never a distraction. Neither was Rachel. They were children. "I wanted to fight him," she said, her voice cracking. "But I didn't know how. I was complicit in the silence." He closed his eyes, letting her words settle. "Rachel doesn't know." "No," Margaret said. "He kept it from her. She was adopted by the Monroes. Powerful family. Friends of your father. She never knew who she really was." David's thoughts turned to Rachel, his fiancée, her icy poise, her longing for identity and control. Was it all because she'd grown up without the truth? He ended the call and sat for a long time, surrounded by a silence so deep it pressed against his ribs. When he finally rose, he drove straight to Beacon. Lily and Tom were outside her apartment, chalking the sidewalk with flowers and stars. She looked up as his car pulled in, her face brightening. But when she saw the look in his eyes, her smile faltered. "Something's wrong," she said softly. David crouched beside her. "There's something I need to tell you." She studied his face. "Is it about my mom?" "In part," he said gently, "but mostly, it's about you and someone else." He unfolded the page with the code, LB plus EB. "You have a sister, Lily," he said. "A twin." Her mouth fell open. Tom stepped closer, stunned. "What?" David nodded slowly. "Your mother tried to protect both of you, but you were separated shortly after birth. The records were erased. Your names were changed." Lily's voice barely rose above a whisper. "Where is she?" "She's here," David said, his voice shaking. "Her name is Rachel Monroe." Lily blinked. "Your girlfriend?" David nodded. "We didn't know. None of us knew, but I have proof now, and I want to make it right." Lily looked down at the chalk drawing she'd just finished, a red flower with two identical stems. "What if she doesn't want to know me?" she asked quietly. David placed a hand on her shoulder. "She deserves the choice, and so do you." Tom took a deep breath. "This changes everything." David stood. "Yes, and we're not done. The people who did this, who hurt Laura, who broke apart families, they're still walking free." Lily reached into her pocket and pulled out her mother's diary. "Then we finish what she started." David looked at her, this brave, brilliant child who refused to let pain turn her bitter, and nodded. "We will." The storm arrived just after sunset. Not the kind with thunder and rain, but the kind that brewed behind doors and whispered through locked corridors. David sat in his penthouse study, the microfilm and Project Genesis report spread across his desk like crime scene photos. Outside, the Chicago skyline blinked quietly in the distance, lights flickering like the rhythm of a city that never truly slept. He wasn't sure how long he stared at the names. The list of children, the dates of forced separations, the fates marked in red ink. Of all the evil his father had orchestrated, this was the most calculated. A gentle knock interrupted his thoughts. Megan peeked her head in. "Your mother's here." David stood, heart heavy. Margaret Bennett stepped inside slowly, dressed in a gray wool coat, her hands clasped in front of her like a woman approaching confession. "I thought I'd never see that envelope again," she said, nodding toward the documents. Her voice carried an ache, one carved by years of silence and survival. David didn't respond immediately. He poured 2 glasses of water, handed her one, then motioned to a chair. Margaret sat delicately. "You know everything now, don't you?" "Not everything," David replied, his tone quiet but firm. "Just enough to hate him for the rest of my life." She flinched but didn't argue. "I need you to tell me how this happened," he said. "All of it. No more secrets." Margaret exhaled slowly. "Your father was obsessed with legacy. He believed the Bennett bloodline needed to be optimized, controlled. When I got pregnant with twins, he told me only one could inherit the company. 2 heirs meant division, confusion, competition." David swallowed hard. "He told me Elizabeth died at birth," she continued, her voice cracking. "I never saw a death certificate, just his word, and I believed him, until I overheard him speaking to one of the hospital administrators a year later. I confronted him. He didn't deny it." David stared at her, stunned. "Why didn't you leave?" "Because by then, Rachel was being raised by the Monroes, powerful people with deep pockets. Your father threatened to destroy them too if I said anything." I stayed for you." His throat tightened. "I wish you'd fought." "I did, David. Just not the way you wanted. I saved what I could. I kept records. I hid that microfilm in the only place he wouldn't look, inside the ring your sister wore." David looked away. "Madison. Lily. She thinks Rachel won't want anything to do with her." Margaret shook her head. "She's stronger than you think. Both of them are." He stood abruptly. "I need to see Rachel." Margaret hesitated. "You should prepare her. The truth will shatter everything she's believed." David's voice sharpened. "That's exactly why I can't wait." An hour later, Rachel stood in the center of his living room, a glass of untouched wine in her hand, confusion etched across her face. "You're not making sense," she said, pacing slowly. "What does Lily have to do with me?" David took a deep breath and held out the report. "You're not just a Monroe, you're a Bennett. Lily is your sister, your twin." She stared at him, blinking, lips parted. "That's not funny." "It's not a joke," he replied gently. "We have the documents. DNA can confirm it. Your entire life was built on a lie." Rachel's hand trembled. The wine glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble floor. "No," she whispered. "My parents. They wouldn't lie to me." "They didn't know," David said quickly. "Your adoption was orchestrated through private channels. It was all arranged by Charles." She dropped into a chair, staring blankly at the floor. "I don't know what to do with this." "You don't have to do anything right now," he said. "But Lily deserves the truth. So do you." Rachel's voice cracked. "I feel like my whole life just collapsed." David knelt beside her. "I felt the same when I met Lily, but then I saw who she was. Kind, resilient, brilliant. She's your reflection." Rachel slowly looked up at him. "Do I have to meet her?" "No," he said softly, "but I think you'll want to." A long silence passed. Then Rachel nodded once. "Okay, but not as a press event, not with cameras, just us." David nodded back. "Just us." The next morning, David drove to Poughkeepsie with Rachel in the passenger seat. The air was thick with anticipation, each mile unraveling a knot decades in the making. Outside Tom's modest home, Lily waited. Her hair was pulled back in a braid, her fingers fidgeting with the ring around her thumb. As the car door opened, Rachel stepped out, her eyes locking with Lily's. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then, Rachel whispered, "You look like someone I used to see in my dreams." Lily took a step forward. "I think I was dreaming of you too." They stood face to face, a heartbeat apart, two lives finally converging. The living room was small, but warm, the kind of space that held the memory of late-night stories and childhood giggles. The faint scent of cinnamon and old books clung to the air. David stood back, letting the silence between the two girls fill the room. Lily and Rachel faced each other in the center. Neither said a word at first. It wasn't awkward, it was reverent, like they both understood the weight of what was happening without needing to name it. Tom cleared his throat from the doorway, but David gently motioned him to give them space. Tom nodded and stepped out, his quiet trust offering a silent vote of confidence. Rachel's voice broke the stillness. "I thought I was an only child." Lily's mouth twitched into a half-smile. "So did I." Rachel stepped closer, cautiously, eyes scanning Lily's face. "We really are the same. Same freckles, same eyes." "I always hated my hairline," Lily murmured. Rachel laughed gently. "I always thought mine looked weird too." A moment passed before Rachel's face softened further. "What was your favorite bedtime story?" "Mom used to hum this lullaby from an old record," Lily said. "She never sang the words, just the tune. I thought it was made up." Rachel's lips parted. "That melody. I've hummed it since I was little. I never knew why. I thought it was just in my head." Their eyes met again, and something deeper passed between them. Recognition not of resemblance, but of belonging. From the kitchen, David listened with an aching chest. He'd spent so long building towers out of steel and concrete, chasing permanence, but he'd never known anything as real as what he saw in that room, two sisters finding each other in the ruins of a lie. Eventually, the girls sat side by side on the couch, knees touching. Lily pulled out the diary, the one left by her mother, Laura, and handed it to Rachel. "There's a lot in there. Stuff about the orphanage, about how she ran. I didn't understand most of it until David explained everything." Rachel opened it with trembling hands, eyes skimming over the handwriting. "She wrote about me?" Lily nodded. "Every year, on your birthday." Rachel's fingers stilled on a page dated 10 years ago. It simply read, "Happy birthday, Elizabeth. I hope you're safe. I hope you feel loved. I wish I could have kept both of you." Tears welled in Rachel's eyes, but she smiled through them. "I never had a birthday letter before." The weight of years lost hung heavy, but there was healing in the air too, like a wound had finally been named and now could begin to close. Later, over a quiet dinner, Rachel asked questions about Lily's childhood, the uncle who raised her, the way she learned to fix things when they broke. Lily, in turn, wanted to know about Rachel's world, the elite boarding schools, the charities, the speeches and expectations. "Your life sounds shiny," Lily said with a soft laugh. "It was polished," Rachel replied, "but not always warm." David sat back, watching them. For once, he didn't feel the urge to intervene or steer the conversation. It was theirs now. As night fell, Rachel stood to leave, glancing toward the front door, then back at Lily. "Can I come back tomorrow?" Lily's answer was immediate, quiet, and resolute. "I'd like that." Outside, as David walked Rachel to his car, she paused on the sidewalk. "You didn't have to bring me today. You risked everything." "I didn't bring you for me," David said. "I brought you because you deserved to know her. Both of you did." Rachel looked up at the stars, her voice barely above a whisper. "He stole our past, but maybe we can write the ending." David nodded. "And this time, we write it ourselves." Back inside, Lily stood at the window, watching them. She didn't know how to feel. Joy and grief mingled in a way she couldn't describe, but she felt something else too, hope, the fragile kind that needed to be handled with care. She turned, picked up her mother's diary, and began to write. "Today, I met my sister. Her name is Rachel, and even though we lost so much, I think we're about to start something worth finding." The morning sun spilled across the Carter apartment's living room floor in wide golden stripes. David sat at the kitchen table with a mug of black coffee growing cold in his hand, but his thoughts were far from the bitterness of caffeine. Across from him, Lily traced the edges of the ruby ring with her thumb, its surface catching the light in a way that made it pulse like something alive. Tom leaned against the counter, arms folded, watching his niece with quiet protectiveness. The events of the last 24 hours had changed everything, yet the weight of unanswered questions lingered heavily between them. "She always told me it was special," Lily said finally, her voice hushed. "Said it belonged to someone important." David leaned in. "That ring. It's identical to the one I gave Lily Bennett, the girl I thought I lost forever." Tom exhaled through his nose, slow and uncertain. "So, you think Madison, Lily, is her?" "I don't think," David replied, his voice low and resolute. "I know." Lily looked up, blue eyes searching his face. "But what does it mean? Why would my mom hide all this?" David reached into his coat pocket and unfolded the old envelope Margaret had given him the night before. Inside was a faded photograph. 2 babies in the matching bonnets lying in a hospital crib. On the back, scrawled in shaky ink, Lily and Elizabeth, born January 13th, 2015. Hope Haven Maternity Wing. Lily stared at the photo, her eyes widening. "That's me?" she whispered. "And her." David nodded. "Your sister, Rachel, Elizabeth." Before the silence could consume them, Tom stepped forward. "Then why hide it? Why would Laura take Lily and run?" "I think I know," David said as he laid a thin slip of plastic on the table. Lily picked it up and tilted it toward the light. "Is this microfilm?" "It was hidden inside the ring," David said. "I had it scanned last night." He opened his laptop and clicked through the images, grainy scans of typed documents bearing the header Project Genesis. Medical records, research notes, and approval forms stamped with the seal of the old Hope Haven Foundation. "What is this?" Tom asked, eyes narrowing. "An experiment," David replied grimly. "One involving twins separated at birth. They were studying psychological development, nature versus nurture, but off the books. No parental consent, no ethical oversight." Lily's face paled. "You mean they used us?" David nodded solemnly. "Charles, my father, was funding it through shell accounts. Your mother must have discovered the truth. That's why she ran. That's why she changed your name." Tom looked like he'd been punched in the gut. "My brother Mark. He was working on an expose about Hope Haven before he died. The brakes on his car failed. They called it an accident." David's voice hardened. "It wasn't." A long silence settled over the room. Lily sat motionless, her fingers curled protectively around the ring like it was the last tether to the mother she'd lost. Then, from the hallway, Rachel stepped quietly into view. She had come early, holding a manila folder under one arm. "You need to see this," she said softly. They gathered around as she opened the folder and slid out hospital intake forms, photographs, and a sealed court document bearing her adoption records. "My adoptive parents thought they were chosen through a private agency, but the forms," she tapped one with her finger, "they were forged. I traced the funding. Same shell account as Project Genesis." David's jaw clenched. He orchestrated the entire thing. Rachel looked over at Lily, her voice trembling. "He stole our lives, our childhoods, and now we have the evidence to prove it." Tom stepped closer, his voice quiet but firm. "So, what now?" David looked at the three of them, his sister, his twin niece, and the man who had tried to shield them all. The rage, the sorrow, the guilt, it all burned beneath his ribs like fire, but above it rose something else, clarity. "We go public," he said. "We release everything. Every document, every connection. We bring him down." Tom glanced at Lily. "It'll make you a target." Lily straightened her spine. "He already made me one." Rachel stepped beside her and took her hand. "Then let's make him answer." David looked at them. So young, yet stronger than anyone had ever given them credit for. "We do this together. But no more secrets, no more shadows. From now on, we speak the truth." In that moment, it felt like something shifted, not just in the room, but in the world they were about to confront. The lies that had controlled their lives were cracking apart. What would rise from the rubble wasn't just justice, it was redemption. And they would fight for it. It was after midnight when David parked his car in the underground garage of his downtown office. The building, usually buzzing with executives and interns, now sat in eerie silence, security lights casting long shadows across polished concrete. With the microfilm's contents still burning in his mind, David knew there was more hidden in the vaults of his father's empire. He headed straight to the executive archive room. Only a few had access, and Charles Bennett had made sure everything damaging stayed behind biometric locks. But David was his son. Same blood, same thumbprint, and tonight, that blood unlocked a truth decades in the making. The archive smelled of old paper and cold air. Rows of fireproof cabinets lined the walls, and in the far corner sat a reinforced steel safe with a digital panel. David entered the access code, his mother's birthday, and the lock clicked open with a reluctant groan. Inside were dozens of tapes, labeled with sterile codes: GH07, HB12, GNES13. He pulled the one marked GNTW1 and slipped it into the playback deck. The monitor flickered to life, grainy footage filling the screen. 2 bassinets, 2 newborns. Identical girls with hospital bands labeled L. Bennett and E. Bennett. A doctor's voice crackled through, "Subjects viable. Testing separation theory. Parental records sealed. Prepare adoption protocols." David's stomach twisted. There was no mistaking it. This wasn't just a bad experiment. It was premeditated, deliberate, cruel. Another video loaded, this one labeled INT14. It showed his father, Charles Bennett, seated behind his massive desk, flanked by 2 attorneys. "We don't need parental consent," Charles said coldly. "The foundation owns the hospital. If anyone talks, we bury them in red tape or pay them off." David staggered back. The weight of it hit him all at once. The orphanage, the separation, Laura running, Mark Carter's death. It all pointed back to this room, to these tapes, to his father. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he drove to Margaret's house as dawn broke across the city. His mother answered the door in a bathrobe, eyes widening when she saw the tapes in his arms. "I found everything," he said quietly. She stepped aside, ushering him in. He placed the tapes on the kitchen table. Margaret sat down slowly, fingers trembling as she traced the labels. "I suspected," she whispered, "but I never knew how deep it went." David looked her in the eyes. "Did you know about Rachel?" Margaret swallowed hard. "No." "Your father told me Lily died shortly after birth. I grieved a child I never buried." I believed him. A silence passed. Not one of guilt, but of grief, shared and unresolved. "He stole their lives," David said, his voice hoarse. "And yours too," Margaret added, "but you have the chance to make this right." Later that morning, he met Lily, Rachel, Tom, and a handful of trusted allies at a rented conference space. The windows overlooked the city skyline, clean, ambitious, full of false promises. Rachel stood by the glass, arms folded. "You really want to go public with this?" David nodded. "Yes, but not just with words, with evidence." He placed the tapes on the table and pulled out a thumb drive. "I digitized everything. Video, documents, adoption records, financial trails. It's airtight." Tom glanced toward Lily, then back at David. "You're going to destroy him." "I don't care about destroying Charles," David said evenly. "I care about freeing the people he hurt." Rachel took a long breath. "Then we need to control the narrative. No leaks, no anonymous tips. A full press conference. Live, transparent." "I'll handle the media," said Margaret, stepping into the room unannounced. Her tone was sharp, decisive. "This family caused the damage. This family will clean it up." Rachel blinked. "You're with us?" Margaret gave her a long look. "Charles silenced too many people. I won't be one of them anymore." Lily stepped forward, her voice soft but certain. "Then let's tell the truth. Together." David reached for her hand, her small fingers curling into his, and looked at the others. His sister, his niece, his mother, his allies, a circle of broken but unbowed survivors. "This doesn't end with exposure," he said. "It ends when no one ever has to go through what we did." Tom nodded, his eyes misting. "Then let's begin the end." Outside, the city pulsed on, unaware of the reckoning coming its way. The ballroom at the Bennett Legacy Towers had never hosted anything quite like this. Chandeliers glittered overhead, their pristine elegance masking the tension humming through the crowd. Reporters shuffled in with cameras, microphones poised, unsure why the Bennett family had called a last-minute press conference at their own flagship development. At the front of the room, a long table was draped in white linen. Seated at its center was David Bennett, his shoulders squared beneath a crisp navy suit, not as a CEO, but as a brother, a son, and a man who could no longer live under the weight of secrets. To his right sat Margaret Bennett, the matriarch once known for polished charity galas and photo ops, now steely-eyed and determined. To his left, Rachel Monroe, now publicly acknowledged as Elizabeth Bennett, and beside her, Lily. As the final murmurs died down, David leaned toward the microphone. His voice, though calm, carried gravity. "Thank you all for being here. Today is not about a company milestone or a real estate announcement. Today is about truth and redemption." The room stilled. Cameras zoomed in. For decades, the Bennett name stood for power, influence, and untouchable legacy. But what few knew, what I didn't know, was that buried beneath our empire was a history of manipulation, cruelty, and human suffering. A ripple passed through the crowd. David continued, his voice thick with emotion. 15 years ago, twin girls were separated at birth. Records were forged, identities erased. One was given a life of privilege, the other a life of hardship, loss, and questions no child should have to ask. Lily shifted in her seat, her hand trembling slightly beneath the table. "These girls," David said, placing a hand gently over hers, "are my sisters." Gasps erupted. Flashes sparked. Margaret cleared her throat, drawing attention. "My late husband, Charles Bennett, orchestrated their separation. He used his wealth to silence doctors, erase files, and fund unethical programs disguised as philanthropy. I was complicit in my silence. No longer." She looked directly into the cameras. "To those we hurt, know that I am sorry, and I will spend the rest of my life making it right." Rachel leaned forward next. "I was raised believing I had no family, that I was alone. Finding Lily didn't just give me a sister, it gave me back my voice. Today, I choose to use it." Then came the moment no one expected. David reached down and retrieved a flash drive from his briefcase. This drive contains documents, video footage, and financial records proving the existence of Project Genesis. It details adoption fraud, experimentation on minors, and systemic cover-ups carried out through Bennett Foundation hospitals and orphanages. The air grew thick. "I am formally turning it over to federal authorities," he said, handing it to an FBI liaison standing off stage. "Effective immediately. I resign as CEO of Bennett Enterprises. Our family's legacy must no longer be built on lies." From the back of the room, a commotion erupted. Two agents approached the podium, flanking an older man with white hair and a forced, calm expression. Charles Bennett, eyes cold and jaw tight, was being escorted in handcuffs. The evidence had reached them hours earlier, just enough time to make the arrest public. Margaret stood to face him. For a moment, husband and wife locked eyes, and in hers was no hatred, only sorrow. "I warned you," she said softly, "but you buried your conscience too deep." Charles sneered, "And you buried your spine." Before anyone could respond, he was taken away, disappearing into the hallway, his footsteps echoing in defeat. David turned back to the crowd. "This story is no longer just ours. It belongs to every child who was failed by a system that should have protected them. We will rebuild, not a tower, but a future, for Lily, for Elizabeth, for every lost name." Applause didn't erupt. Not at first. It was slow, thoughtful. Then it swelled. Raw, human, unfiltered support. Lily stood, her small frame barely reaching the microphone. Her voice wavered, but her words cut through like a blade. My name is Lily Carter Bennett, and I'm not a secret anymore." The crowd stood. In that moment, the weight of decades lifted, not completely, but enough to breathe again, enough to begin. The aftermath of the press conference unfolded like a tremor echoing through every corridor of power the Bennetts had ever touched. News outlets flooded the airwaves with footage of Charles Bennett's arrest. Headlines splashed with words like corruption, orphans, separation, and redemption. Social media swarmed with support for Lily and Elizabeth, now publicly known as Rachel, and for David, whose courage to dismantle his own legacy stunned a nation accustomed to billionaires hiding behind PR teams and polished lies. Yet amidst the media frenzy, the true transformation was unfolding quietly, in places without cameras or microphones. A week later, Lily stood barefoot in the middle of a construction site. The steel skeleton of a new building rose behind her, raw, unvarnished, and real. David stood beside her, wearing jeans for once, hard hat slightly askew, a far cry from the designer suits that once defined him. "They've started laying the foundation," he said gently, his eyes following the path of workers maneuvering concrete slabs. "This is where Hope Legacy Center will stand." Lily looked up at him, clutching the corner of the site blueprint she had insisted on decorating with her own crayons. Her voice, soft but resolute, whispered, "It doesn't smell like lies here." David's throat tightened. "No, it doesn't." They walked the site together, Lily tracing her fingers along chalk markings on the floor, pausing at what would one day be the library. She turned to him, her expression curious. "Will kids live here, like I did at the other place?" "Some," he replied, bending to her eye level. "But it's more than a home. It's a place where no one gets lost, where every kid is seen, heard, protected." "Even the quiet ones?" she asked. "Especially the quiet ones." Back at their temporary residence, a modest, warm house in Poughkeepsie that David insisted on renting while construction continued, their new family routine had taken root. Margaret had moved in, cooking breakfast every morning like it was her penance and her joy. Rachel, now embracing her name Elizabeth in private, spent long afternoons helping Lily sort through old case files and journals, piecing together the stories of others who had been hurt by Project Genesis. Every night, David wrote letters, not to reporters or investors, but to children who had aged out of the system, to families still searching for missing siblings, to former Hope Haven staff whose guilt had kept them silent. Sometimes the letters came with donations, sometimes just apologies. One afternoon, Lily received a letter of her own. It arrived in a pale, yellow envelope, postmarked from Georgia. Inside was a short note from a woman named Sister Bernice, once a nurse at Hope Haven. She had found a photo of Lily and Rachel as babies, together in one crib, holding hands. "They always calmed each other down," the note read. "No matter how loud the room, when they were together, it was quiet." That night, Lily climbed into Rachel's bed with the photo in her hand. "We were always meant to find each other," she murmured. Rachel pulled her close. "And we did. That's what matters." Meanwhile, Margaret made her own quiet move. She formally transferred 50% of the Bennett family fortune into a trust designed to support child advocacy nonprofits, fund investigative journalism on family separation, and provide legal aid to those wrongfully adopted or trafficked. The first grant went to an independent filmmaker documenting the Hope Haven scandal. David declined all interviews. When pressed by Diane, his old assistant now reinstated and fiercely loyal, he simply said, "The truth's already been told. It doesn't need a spokesman." But the world hadn't forgotten. Letters poured in from every state. Some were written by adults who had survived abusive foster homes, some by kids still in them, a few from anonymous benefactors pledging support for the Hope Legacy Center. Then came the hardest letter of all. It arrived addressed to David in his own handwriting, a time capsule he'd written to himself 10 years ago, found recently by a lawyer combing through family storage. It read, "What have you built that matters really?" He stood in the kitchen reading it, the note trembling in his hands. Margaret entered quietly behind him. "Now you can answer that," she said. David turned to her, eyes moist. "I didn't build an empire. I tore it down." "No," she said firmly. "You transformed it, and that's harder." That evening, Lily took her journal outside and sat beneath the porch light, scribbling on the last page. "I thought I was just a kid fixing engines and reading diaries, but maybe I was fixing something bigger all along." The wind rustled through the trees. For the first time in years, the Bennett name wasn't whispered in fear or scandal. It was spoken with hope. And, tomorrow, they would begin again. The morning of the Bennett Legacy Tower's groundbreaking arrived draped in overcast skies and murmuring tension. The Grand Plaza in White Plains had been transformed into a press event spectacle. Rows of white chairs, velvet ropes, and a polished podium branded with the Bennett name. Reporters and guests filled the space, their chatter a low buzz of speculation and ceremony. No one expected what was about to unfold. David stood backstage behind the curtains of the temporary event tent, adjusting the cuff of his charcoal gray blazer with trembling fingers. He hadn't slept. Neither had Margaret, who stood beside him in a dignified navy coat, her silver hair swept up, her eyes steady. Behind them were Lily and Rachel, Elizabeth now, holding hands. "You don't have to do this," Margaret whispered gently, though her voice held a hint of pride. "Yes, I do," David replied. "Not as a CEO, not as a Bennett, just as their brother." Outside, the event host stepped up to the podium. "And now, the man whose vision brought this tower to life, David Bennett." Polite applause followed. David stepped onto the stage, heart pounding. The wind caught the edge of his speech papers, but he didn't look at them. He didn't need to. This story had lived in his bones too long. "Thank you," he began, voice firm but deeply human. Today was meant to be a celebration of progress, but before we break ground, we must first uncover what's buried beneath it. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. "I stand before you not to break ground for another skyscraper," he continued, "but to break open the truth. For decades, the Bennett family name has represented power, innovation, and secrecy." Behind him, a large screen flickered to life. Rachel tapped the tablet in her lap and the first image appeared, a black and white photo of two baby girls in a crib, hands intertwined. "These are Lily and Elizabeth Bennett," David said. "Twins, separated at birth through illegal adoption schemes authorized by my father, Charles Bennett." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras clicked wildly. They were born at Hope Haven Home, which was shut down shortly after due to allegations of child experimentation and falsified death certificates, David continued. "My sister Lily, now known as Madison Carter, grew up unaware of who she was. So did Elizabeth." Margaret stepped forward. "I was complicit through my silence, but no more." The screen changed again. Hospital records, Project Genesis files, the microfilm findings. Reporters were on their feet. The truth spilled out with undeniable weight. Then Rachel stepped to the microphone. "My name is Elizabeth Bennett. I grew up believing I was Rachel Monroe, but deep inside I always felt different. I never imagined I had a sister, or a past stolen by people I trusted." "And now?" one reporter shouted. "Now," she said, "I reclaim my name, and I stand with my family, not the one forged by money, but the one restored by truth." The final image appeared on screen. Charles Bennett's signature on the Project Genesis approval documents. Within moments, federal agents appeared at the edge of the crowd. David paused, locking eyes with Lily, who nodded solemnly. "I invite the FBI to do what should have been done long ago," David said. Hold my father accountable, and let this be the last time a child is lost to silence." Charles, seated in the front row, stood abruptly. "You don't know what you're doing," he spat. "You're throwing away everything I built." David stepped down from the podium and faced him directly. "No," he said quietly. "I'm building something better." Agents moved in. Charles resisted, briefly, but his power no longer shielded him. As he was escorted out, the crowd stood in stunned silence. Later, Lily sat in a quiet corner backstage, hugging the blueprint for the Hope Legacy Center to her chest. Rachel knelt beside her. "Are you okay?" Lily smiled faintly. "I'm not scared anymore." Neither was David. That night they returned home to the small house in Poughkeepsie. Not a mansion, but a home filled with something richer than marble: redemption. He watched his sisters laughing at the kitchen table, flipping through childhood photos they'd never known existed. Margaret stirred tea in the corner, humming a lullaby from her youth. David leaned against the doorframe, letting the warmth of it all settle over him. For the first time, he wasn't running a company. He was helping rebuild a family. And tomorrow, they'd begin planning a center that would carry their story, and hundreds more, into the light. 1 year later, the once crumbling grounds of Hope Haven Home had transformed into something extraordinary. Where the rusted gates and boarded windows once loomed, now stood a vibrant new facility, its entrance flanked by flowering gardens and a polished bronze plaque that read, "Hope Legacy Center, a place for truth, healing, and second chances." David Carter, he no longer used the Bennett name, stood at the entrance quietly watching a group of children spill across the lawn, their laughter rising like music into the spring air. Lily walked beside him, a clipboard tucked under one arm, her other hand holding a daisy freshly picked from the garden. "They're planting another memory tree today," she said softly. "One for Mark Carter." David nodded, emotion stirring. Mark's story, once buried, had been brought to light in the center's memorial wing. The photo of the brave young journalist now hung beside others lost to the shadows of the past. Inside, the center buzzed with life. Counseling rooms, music therapy, reading corners, and reunification services. It had become a refuge for children aging out of the system, for mothers escaping abusive guardianships, and for those who'd lost faith in institutions. Here, faith was being rebuilt, one act of care at a time. In the community kitchen, Margaret wore an apron and stirred soup beside Rachel, still known in public as Elizabeth Monroe, but finally comfortable with both her names. She laughed easily now, the years of internal doubt melting into newfound purpose. She had launched a scholarship fund for displaced adoptees and volunteered weekly at the trauma recovery program. "I never thought I'd see this day," Margaret said, wiping her hands on a towel. "A place where our name doesn't mean fear or silence, but hope." David stepped into the sunlit atrium, where a mural stretched across the far wall. It depicted two small girls, one holding a daisy, the other a violin, standing in front of a glowing tree whose branches formed the shape of wings. Below it, in painted script, "We were never broken, just waiting to be found." He closed his eyes for a moment. Then footsteps approached. "Uncle David!" He turned just in time to catch a little boy with curly black hair and untied sneakers barreling into his arms. Behind him came Maya, a social worker who had helped relocate dozens of displaced children. "We've got 3 new kids from Albany," she said, "trafficking survivors, 2 girls and a boy, ages 7 to 11. David nodded. "Let's get them settled." Later that afternoon, beneath the shade of the newly planted Mark Carter tree, David and Lily sat together, on a bench. A gentle breeze stirred the branches. A red ribbon hung from one of them, fluttering like a heartbeat. "Sometimes I still can't believe any of this is real," Lily whispered, "that we're here, that we made it through." David looked at her and smiled, the kind of smile that came not from success, but from peace hard-earned. "You saved me," he said. "No," she replied, resting her head on his shoulder. "We saved each other." Across the courtyard, a music class began in the outdoor amphitheater. A group of children were learning a simple song on violin. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. The tune was slightly off-key, but beautiful, raw, brave. Rachel emerged from the building, waving them over. "We've got a donor meeting in 10. Come inside, you two. You're muddy." David chuckled. "Tell them it's soil. We're building roots." That night, after the last child had gone to bed and the halls fell quiet, David stood in the center's heart, a rotunda filled with candles, each one representing a child reclaimed, a family reunited, or a truth revealed. He lit one more candle. For Laura, for Tom, for every name that had vanished beneath redacted files and forged documents. He didn't need the Bennett Towers. He didn't miss the boardrooms or spotlights. Here, among survivors and seekers, he had found something wealth could never offer: belonging. He looked out the window toward the stars, faint, distant, but present, and whispered, "We kept our promise." And in the silence that followed, there was no applause, only peace. The story had ended, but the legacy had just begun.